German broadcasters officially announced Adolf Hitler's death on May 1st, 1945, a day after he died by suicide in his Führer bunker in Berlin. The announcement was made by Karl Dönitz, who had been named Hitler's successor. Dönitz addressed the nation via radio, stating that Hitler had fallen, quote, fighting to the last breath against Bolshevism. But is that actually what happened? There's been much speculation about the final months and days of Adolf Hitler. Was his last day April 30th, or did he flee a destroyed Germany for Argentina or another neighboring South American country? I want to approach this from a few different angles. The first angle I'll be talking about is Hitler's health as it is in relation to state of mind and willingness to live in late April 1945. In that final month, Hitler's health was in a very poor state, both physically and mentally. He was 56 years old, but looked much older due to years of stress, illness, and the deteriorating state of Nazi Germany as World War II came to an end. Physically, he was frail, shaky, and pale. Observers noted that his left hand trembled uncontrollably, likely due to Parkinson's disease, which many historians believe he suffered from. People close to Hitler originally recognized the potential of Parkinson's in the early 1940s, but it became more and more obvious late in 1944 into early 1945, right before the end. Theodor Morell, Hitler's personal physician, recognized these symptoms and noted them. He likely treated them with experimental drugs of the time. There is, of course, the famous last video of Hitler on April 20th, 1945, which was his birthday, right outside of the Führer bunker, congratulating, at that point, basically kids, because that was the state of Germany in April of 1945. They were trying to find anyone that was willing to fight, and during the propaganda video, it was obvious that Hitler's left hand was shaking uncontrollably. Hitler, during his final visits to the front, appeared in a shaking state according to generals who sparsely saw him. It was easier for them to tell the shocking difference within the span of a few years, the crazy deterioration in 1944. Many observed that he looked hunched over and weak. By that time, he was heavily reliant on medications provided by his personal doctor. These included cocktails of drugs, possibly including amphetamines, which was pretty routine at the time. It also might have contributed to his erratic behavior late in his life. Hitler's physical movements slowed significantly, another telltale symptom in relation to Parkinson's. So that just gives you a little bit of a backstory on Hitler's waning health in 1945. Now, let's talk about the other side of the coin, Argentina. It is estimated up to 5,000 Nazis and contributors fled to Argentina after World War II, although the exact number is difficult to confirm. Argentina's president at the time was sympathetic to fascist ideologies and welcomed Nazis and other European fugitives after the war. This, of course, added credibility to the idea that Hitler could have joined them. Many high-ranking Nazis escaped to South America through well-organized networks known as rat lines, often with help of sympathetic organizers. Argentina, in particular, was a major destination. There was also a few eyewitness accounts that said they saw Hitler, although they are very vague and unprovable, but they did contribute to the idea that Hitler had escaped. There's also books like Grey Wolf, The Escape of Adolf Hitler. It was a 2011 novel that suggested Hitler had escaped via a submarine to Argentina with Eva Braun. Hitler's body was never publicly displayed after his suicide in the Berlin Führer bunker. Soviet accounts on recovering his remains were initially inconsistent, leading to suspicions. The Cold War era added to this mystery, with Western intelligence agencies initially unclear about Hitler's fate. Hitler was said to be immediately cremated, done by his own orders. This was mainly in response to the fate of Mussolini, one of Hitler's allies throughout World War II, and also one of his heroes in turning Germany fascist. Hitler was deeply affected by the death of Mussolini, who was executed by Italian partisans on April 28, 1945. That would be just 2 days before Hitler's own death. Mussolini's death played a significant role in shaping Hitler's thoughts and decisions in his final hours. Hitler feared that if he were to be captured, he too would be paraded, humiliated, or executed in a similar fashion. This reinforced the resolved to avoid the capture at all costs, and he's quoted as saying, quote, "I do not wish to fall into the hands of the enemy who will make a spectacle of me." Now, if Hitler would have been captured by the Soviets, it undoubtedly would have been very bad. This was just all speculation, but I have heard many people say that Hitler would have been paraded around the streets of Moscow almost as like a circus animal if he were captured alive. If Hitler wanted an easier situation, he could have came out of the bunker and surrendered. They likely would have given him a trial, possibly part of the Nuremberg trials, and executed him for war crimes. It's also important to note, if Hitler did want to be captured by the American Allies, he would have had to time it properly and almost go to the Allies, considering the Soviets beat the Western Allies to the bunker. And it is just speculation when it comes to what the Soviet Union would have done with Adolf Hitler had they located him alive. Some people say, well, it would have just been an extension of the Nuremberg trials. He would have been treated like everyone else, but obviously Hitler was the USSR's big prize. Mussolini's death certainly impacted Hitler, and that must be taken into account when discussing the possibility of this escape along with his deteriorating health. There was a semi-famous photo of what is speculated to be a very old Adolf Hitler with some sort of towel over his head. The image first surfaced in books, documentaries, and conspiracy forums. It is said to be somewhere in South America, possibly either Colombia or Argentina, although there is no viable verification of this image. I remember when I was younger always seeing this image on the first Google search. It's kind of interesting. When I searched it up on Google, it took me a while to find it now. Not that that really matters. The photo's origins to this day remain unclear, and there is no credible historian or source that has ever authenticated it. It is likely staged or edited, or it could just be an old guy that looks semi-like how Hitler would have looked at an advanced age. I have seen different documentaries involving many eyewitness accounts out of Argentina and surrounding countries claiming that they saw Hitler or someone who resembles Hitler, but there is no conclusive evidence of it. There were also several mansions in South America. The rumor is that these mansions housed Nazis escaping, which fueled speculation that Hitler could potentially be there. And there's one mansion in specific that's been widely photographed that is now abandoned. It is still up, but it's abandoned, that was thought to be housed by Hitler. The speculation is very understandable considering the Soviets were the first one to Hitler's body if he did die in the bunker, and they offered very little transparency when it comes to the charred remains of Hitler. A piece of skull with a bullet hole believed to be from Hitler was recovered by the Soviets, but in 2009, a DNA test conducted on this fragment revealed it likely belonged to a woman, leading to doubts about its authenticity. It seems very unlikely that that would have been Hitler's. However, the Soviets did have other evidence to confirm Hitler's death. The Soviets recovered portions of Hitler's jawbone and teeth, which were critical in terms of identification. Hitler's own personal dentist and dental assistant were interrogated by the Soviets. They supposedly confirmed that the recovered dental remains matched Hitler's unique dental records, including gold bridges. There was a CIA memo that was released over 50 years ago. The contents included documents in relation to the JFK assassination, along with a former German trooper who told a CIA agent that he met Hitler in a Colombian city in 1954. The memo included a supposed picture of the two in the Colombian city in 1954. It added that it was suspected Hitler had left Argentina in January of 1955. However, the story is very unlikely to be legitimate, and porcelain crowns. My honest opinion is that Hitler died via a self-inflicted gunshot wound on April 30th, 1945. My opinion is formed off the basis mainly of two things, and neither of them are Soviet evidence. The first being Hitler's poor health and an extreme decline that the Nazis saw in him in the early 1940s. I think most people who believe that Hitler escaped to Argentina visualize him and his health the same way they did in the early 1930s when he was giving his speeches and in all the videos that we see of him. That was simply not the case. He was a different man. man later on in the war, not just mentally, but also physically. Because of this poor health, there would be very little upside in trying to flee to Argentina, because if he made it to Argentina, all of that risk, the risk of being caught by the Soviets, it's not like Parkinson's, especially in the 1940s, was all that curable and was a fun disease to live with. So even if Hitler had made it to South America, he's living a very shallow, depressed life with an uncurable disease. My second reason for this opinion that he died in the Fuhrer bunker would be the death of Mussolini and the impact it had on Hitler. Mussolini died April 28th, which was 2 days before Hitler committed suicide himself. They were both fascist leaders. They were part of the Axis. It is understandable for him to think, if I don't take action and eliminate myself, something possibly, likely, even worse is going to happen to me, considering the Soviets are very likely going to beat the US and Great Britain to my bunker, which is exactly what happened. Now, there is no 1000% stone cold piece of evidence that completely confirms Hitler died in the bunker unless you trust the Soviet Union, but based off of the context clues we've been given, it's extremely, extremely likely that that is what happened. And I do feel like most people that believe the conspiracy of the escape to Argentina don't know the full context, the state of mind of Adolf Hitler in 1945, not just with the war situation and not wanting to be captured, but also with the deteriorating health. Is there much upside to trying to risk it to flee to Argentina when you're dealing with Parkinson's? Add to the fact that if Hitler was actually planning on leaving, he likely would have had to do so well before April 25th, when Berlin was fully surrounded and escape became almost impossible. The evidence that we have of Hitler still being in Berlin within those final days was a photo of him overlooking ruins just outside his bunker. Maybe the biggest piece of evidence was the reported response Hitler had inside of the bunker, reported by his secretary in a book after World War II detailing his reaction to Mussolini's death. She was not the only one that reported on what he said either. Multiple other Nazi officials had similar statements, which would lead me to believe that undoubtedly Hitler died in the bunker, because at that point it would have been April 28th, with the city of Berlin completely surrounded. Risking an escape at Hitler's advanced age with deteriorating health seems implausible.